Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining us tonight as we spend this next hour together. I do hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family. My opening observations tonight, courage. You see, courage is defined as mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Congressman John Lewis certainly fills the example of what courage should always look like. He leaves behind a legacy of courage and conscience. In fact, he is described as the conscience of Congress. John Lewis lived his life as a champion of civil rights. He helped give birth to the movement along with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., C.T. Vivian, Hosea Williams, and so many others who led the way. They pioneered, they trailblazed the way to open up doors for Black Americans that could not be opened before they stepped onto the world stage. And even in the face of danger, even when he was beaten and thought he would die on that Edmund Pettus Bridge on that bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama, he emerged from that moment, that near-death experience, without any trace of anger or bitterness. He remained a force of good trouble to stir up the hearts of young and old. He was a larger figure than the partisan politics that frustrate us and even paralyze us in division. Yet John Lewis continued to pray and fight for this country in his effort to redeem the soul of America, which he discussed during his 50th anniversary march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge alongside of President Obama and President George W. Bush. Together, they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Listen to this excerpt from the message that Lewis delivered that day.
Don't get lost in a sea of despair. Stand up for what you believe. Because in a final analysis, we are one people, one family, the human family. We all live in the same house. The American house, the world house. We're Black, we're white, we are Hispanic, Asian American, Native American, but we're one people.
And so today, in the rotunda of the Capitol, we heard from Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, as well as Minority Whip Congressman Jim Clyburn, as they talked about their friend, John Lewis.
John Lewis lived and worked with urgency because the task was urgent. But even though the world around him gave him every cause for bitterness, he stubbornly treated everyone with respect and love. All so that, as his friend Dr. King once put it, we could build a community at peace with itself.
John Lewis often spoke of a beloved community, a vision that he shared with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of the community connected and uplifted by faith, hope, and charity. And indeed, John had deep faith, believing that every person has a spark of divinity, making them worthy of respect. And he had faith in the charity of others, which is what gave him so much hope.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking as he did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen.
Welcome back to the program. So now it gives me great pleasure to talk about a man that has given us so much of his life and the life and legacy of John Lewis. All this week we'll be remembering him on this show as well as throughout the nation. As many of you may know, John Lewis will begin to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol here in Washington, D.C. starting today. There will be a public viewing. People will be able to stand outside to give him tribute. And joining me now are three gentlemen who had the pleasure of working with him. They have known him through the power of the stories and also through the power of knowing him personally. And that is Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who is the CEO and president of the NNPA, Black Press USA. Good of you to join us, Dr. Chavis.
Good afternoon. It's always good to be with you.
Good to be with you too, sir. Also, Stacy Brown, who is the chief correspondent for the Black Press USA. And also, we're joined by Paul Cobb out on the West Coast. He is the publisher of the Oakland Post. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Gentlemen, I want to start with, Paul, let me start with you because I understand that in your times of knowing John Lewis, you were actually on the Edmund Pettus Bridge marching with him on that bloody Sunday. Can you recall what that was like for us?
Well, it was a harrowing event, and it called all of us. The seriousness of the thing. We had just gotten in from California. We had stopped by Huntsville College, Oakwood College, and recruited some students to join with us. I had an opportunity to participate with Ivanhoe Donaldson, who was the chief staff organizer, as both a reporter and a usher, as well as a marcher. So I had a triple role in that event.
Many people will recall through archival video of that fateful day what was going on, how you were peacefully protesting, marching across that bridge, and then you were met by Alabama state troopers. At that moment, what was going through your mind, and were you near enough to see what was happening to John Lewis, who was then one of the youngest members marching across that bridge?
No, I was not near enough to see him actually be hit. No.
But you recall that day, and it had to be a lot of confusion and fear and chaos.
A lot of confusion. Yes, a lot of confusion and chaos was about, people yelling and running and the usual.
Did it surprise you at all to see that such brute force was used by the Alabama state troopers against peaceful protesters?
No, a lot of us had expected that because of what had happened a month earlier to C.T. Vivian. Reverend C.T. Vivian, who had led a group of marchers to the courthouse, had been struck by, I think his name was Sheriff Jim Clark, and had been knocked down and had been bloodied. So in that sense, historically, the first person to shed blood on the steps, in Selma, was C.T. Vivian. And that sparked concern. And the march came from the result of Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was another civil rights worker, had been killed. And the group had decided to march across the bridge. And the reason why that the sheriff and the state troopers were on the other side of the bridge is because of the bridge had separated the county. And there was a march to demand that the governor and the state officials recognized that the seriousness of the voter registration campaign because of Jimmy Lee Jackson's death. And that sparked the concern. So there was an expectation that there would be a repeat action from Sheriff Jim Clark.
So
the same way, a repeat action by the state troopers, similar to what had happened to C.T. Vivian.
So, and C.T. Vivian, and I should point out that C.T. Vivian as well as John Lewis died on the same day,
Yes.
and we lost two giants in the civil rights struggle. We still struggle for that today. Dr. Benjamin Chavis is with me as well. And Doc, what Paul is talking about refers to that Bloody Sunday and the historical moment, because on the heels of what happened in Selma, President Lyndon Baines Johnson pushed forward the Voting Rights Act, but it took blood, it took courage, and you were a young man at the time, just a teenager, watching and also participating in the Southern Christian leadership at the age of
Right.
14. What was it like for you?
Well, thank you. Yes, I was the youth coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in my home state of North Carolina in 1965, when that eventful march of courageous freedom fighters, John Lewis, Jose Williams, Paul Cobb, and so many others marching across that bridge. And I think what Paul said is significant, that we knew that there were dangers to marching for voting rights. We knew that there were dangers of participating and demanding the civil rights for Black Americans and others who had been systematically denied, not only in the South, but across the country, but particularly in the South. And we know if we could win voting rights in the South, it will help Black people across the country. The thing that I remember of that day, we all rededicated ourselves. First, the tragic murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was organizing in Alabama to get the right to vote. His death, his murder, brought people to Selma to protest. And the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian was a great organizer. The thing about all of this is courage.
Yep.
Courage, courage, courage. It wasn't that people didn't have some fear or some nervousness. That's just part of human nature. But courage overcomes one's fear. Courage overcomes one's apprehensions and frustrations. And because the truth of the matter is, it would have been more dangerous not to protest. It would have been more serious to cave in to white supremacy. And I think that we're all indebted in 2020 for what happened in the 1960s by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and others, Black preachers, organizers. We all came together, and as Paul just said, it came all the way from California to join this protest, and that was the case. People from East Coast, West Coast, the South converged on Alabama, because we knew that Alabama was going to be one of the hardest rock to crack in terms of challenging white supremacy and challenging Black voter suppression, which continues today, incidentally, Black voter suppression.
I would like to punctuate the statements about courage. There is something about the collective action of a group of people. When you're together, courage tends to be more tolerable, and it tends to dissipate because there's comfort in the collective of everybody moving together toward, even though you're always looking out, worrying of what's going to happen next. On the second leg of the march, when we were marching all the way to Montgomery, every night we worried about a stray pickup truck driving by. Sometimes we saw a gun in the back of the window of a pickup truck. And I remember, to show you how dangerous it was at all times, after King gave his speech in Montgomery, we were walking back towards the encampment, and some of us were offered a ride. I was offered a ride by the late Viola Liuso, and something instinctively told me not to get in the car, because I was wondering, what is this going to look like, me riding down an Alabama road with a white woman just before it gets before the sun sets. And sure enough, 30 minutes later, we had gotten the word that she had been shot. So the courage is something, it punctuates the fact that you had to stay together at all times. And this, the collective of staying together dissipates the courage, even though it doesn't dissipate the commitment to the mission. So I just wanted to add that point about the courage.
Thank you for that.
And the fear.
That's an important point. Thank you, Paul. And again, Paul, thank you for what you did years ago in Selma. And also thank you for what you continue to do now as distinguished publisher of the Oakland Post in Oakland, California. I think, Kelly, and then, Stacy can weigh in on this. The question now before all of us, where do we go from here? Dr. King's last book was, where do we go from here, chaos or community? And the community that Paul just described, the fellowship, the comradeship, the collective togetherness is what we have to maintain to push forward. The 2020, the vote, I was with John Lewis this past March when he made his last physical, when he was alive, to go across the bridge for his last time. And he got up on people's shoulder. He was literally dying from pancreatic cancer, but he made the effort to Selma one more time. And the thing that he said, we have to vote in 2020 like we never voted before. That was his exact words. And certainly we have to get the vote out across this country. This is vital. This is the most consequential election in American history in 2020. And the Black vote is going to be the key determinative vote who will be the next president of the United States of America.
Let me bring in Stacy Brown now, who is the chief correspondent for the Black Press USA. And Stacy, you no doubt have followed the incredible career of C.T. Vivian as well as John Lewis. And we've heard from Paul, who was there on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day, that bloody Sunday in Alabama. And we've heard from him. And but then we've also heard from Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who was also watching the developments there as the coordinator of the youth portion of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But what did you say? What do you think about what's happened now in the death of John Lewis, the death of C.T. Vivian? And you, of course, were watching the developments and reporting on the developments this past weekend. And you look at the way he was memorialized, John Lewis, crossing that bridge for a final time, and actually state troopers saluting him as he marched across that.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you. What's amazing to me, I have to say it from the top, here we are on the Black News Channel, and we have the Black Press, and the resources that we have and the importance that we have to have some historical figures that are still with us, that are leading us still, like Dr. Chavis and Paul Cobb. So we have so much to draw on. Like you, Kelly, I come from mainstream media, but I've been fortunate to be with the Black Press for the past 9 years. I believe it's been about 9 years now, and you get to tap into what really matters to Black America and people of color in general. And John Lewis, covering John Lewis was very, very interesting at all times. And one of the things I appreciate, just the same as I appreciate with Dr. Chavis and individuals who come out of that the 1960s and that civil rights era, is that when you go into a room with a John Lewis or a Ben Chavis or C.T. Vivian, you think, wow, these are giants. They're gonna, overshadow the room. They always gave you your space in that room. It wasn't my room. It wasn't John Lewis's room. It's not Dr. Chavis's room. It's not Paul Cobb's room. They gave you that space. And John Lewis really, it was about the message. With Dr. Chavis, it's about the message. With C.T. Vivian, it was about the message. It's not about calling attention to me, myself. And a giant like John Lewis, so covering John Lewis, I always felt that, wow, you look at politicians and you look at figures that people tend to revere, and you wonder what type of person they really are. And when you're in the room, when you're talking to them, when you're covering them, you realize that these are unique individuals. These are not just, John Lewis wasn't just a congressman. He wasn't just a civil rights leader. He was a genuine human being who truly believed in what he stood for. And so now, what do we have? We have a school in Virginia that was previously named for, of all people, Robert E. Lee. It's being changed to John Lewis's school. We have John Lewis coming across that Pettus Bridge over the weekend. I don't care what walk of life you come from, even if you're a white supremacist, you had to understand what that really meant. Him coming, and as was stated earlier, all these years ago in 1965, those state troopers were waiting with billy clubs and all types of weapons. Well, over the weekend, when they brought John Lewis's body across that Pettus Bridge, they were waiting to salute him.
Yeah, it is a remarkable testament to his faith, to his hope, to his love for this nation. We should point that out, and to his courage, as we've talked about throughout this program, to carry the dream forward that Dr. King had espoused and talked about when they had the initial march on Washington in 1963. And at that time, John Lewis was the youngest member to speak and address that massive assemblage of people. And every time I've met John Lewis or encountered him, I always remarked on one thing. And Paul and Dr. Chavis and Stacy, one thing that I always noticed about him is that he was so humble. And to me, that really accentuated all that he was in terms of trying to be a man who told people, keep on causing good trouble, good trouble that would allow us and afford us the opportunity to have our rights recognized in the Black community, as well as to be respected throughout the world. Dr. Chavis, what do you say about his humility and his tenacity at the same time?
Well, I think that certainly he was a person who had no arrogance about him. He had humility, but he also had a sense of resilience, a sense of being able to envision the future. Good trouble means that you're going to deal with whatever is happening today to make tomorrow better than today. And it appears to me, and Paul could comment on this because he knew John Lewis personally, even more than me. John Lewis sought ways and means how to make sure that the next generation not only accepted the baton of leadership, but accepted what the price, when you hear me talk about keep your eyes on the prize, I think what is the prize? It's freedom, justice, and equality. It's voting rights for all. It's healthcare for all. It's economic empowerment for our communities, getting people out of poverty. Again, these are not loose words. One of the things that I just remember about John Lewis, when he spoke in his later years, every word he spoke came from his heart, soul, and spirit. It was authentic. If there's ever an authentic freedom fighter, it was John Lewis.
Tell us about him, John Lewis, the person, the man. He was a man who was so dedicated to the cause of finding freedom and equality.
Yeah, if we are going to channel the spirit of John Lewis and his humility. If he could be with us today, he would say, yes, it's an honor to name a bridge after me, but can you figure out a way to include those people of Selma somehow in naming the structures? Because there was the Boynton family, and there's the Blands, and there's the present Congresswoman Sewell. He would say, I want to see the community of Selma honored as well. So that's how he would express his humility. Often when we talked about different campaigns, when I worked with him in Mississippi, I remember when we were at the home of Fannie Lou Hamer, and we would talk about voter registration and get out the vote drives, because I was the field director for the Southern Elections Fund, where we would go around and help Black elected officials get elected. And when Benny Thompson was running for mayor of Bolton, Mississippi, it was John Lewis with his network of contacts that helped us find the list of people to raise money for both. Now Benny Thompson is congressperson. So John, in all of his efforts, he was always pushing and highlighting others, and he wanted others to be included, even though, and he led by example. His courage was to do and not just to say, even though he was known as a preacher who would speak loudly when given a microphone and given an opportunity, but it was through quiet action. He would take the time to talk to people. He would, whenever he saw children, or we would at a church meeting or something, John would stop and talk to them, and always recognize others. So it was the humility of inclusion, recognition, and respectfully acknowledging that others played a part. And I think that is the spirit we should channel through the Black press, to remind people in this remaining 99 days before the election that we need to register, fully register, go to and make sure that we vote, go to the polls or vote by mail, whatever system is being acknowledged, because John Lewis's name should be synonymous with voting. Black votes matter.
And one of the public acts that John Lewis did while he was close to death was standing there on Black Lives Matter Plaza, facing the White House here in Washington, the nation's capital. And alongside of him was the Washington, D.C. Mayor, Muriel Bowser. And he was making a profound statement to the President of the United States, as well as to all people of the United States and the world for that matter, that in the wake of George Floyd's death, and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, that justice and peace must be sought after vigorously and with courage and with faith. Because you also said, Paul, that he was a preacher who spoke loudly, yet quietly he was behind the scenes doing things. You know, it's a famous saying, Stacey, that sometimes the greatest sermon you preach is the life you live. So as you look at John Lewis, Stacey, from your vantage point as a chief correspondent for the Black Press USA, and you see all of these juxtapositions with John Lewis and how he lived his life, even to the very end, what's going through your mind in terms of how we move forward in America?
Well, every time you ask John Lewis a question, he gave you an answer, and he gave you a direct answer. John Lewis never beat around the bush. So with that said, we have to be direct. We have to look for, I hear different ones talk about what they're looking for in Joe Biden's choice for vice president, what they're looking for in the president. But you have to let them know what you want. You have to, and that was, in interviewing John Lewis on a number of occasions, it was just simply, tell me what you're looking for. And that's what we have to do. It's not, I think everyone would agree. I think Dr. Chavis would agree. Paul Cobb would agree. It's not time to sugarcoat anything. It's not time to beat around the bush. It's time to be direct. And I think John Lewis was always direct, at least every time I've had the opportunity to cover him. And I know these gentlemen feel the same way. So we have to be direct with our intentions.
That's right. And John Lewis did not kowtow or shelter his language for political expediency. In fact, John Lewis went against the grain. You
Yep.
know, that's what good trouble means.
Yeah.
You're not trying to be popular. You're trying to be right in the sight of God. You're trying to be right on the side of history. And certainly, we all know today that John Lewis lived his life not only on the right side of history, but he helped shape the history that we now have to continue for voting rights, that we have to continue for civil rights, that we have to continue for human rights.
One way to understand about John Lewis's directness, if you go back and review the March on Washington and the speech that John Lewis's proposed speech, the stir that it created, by today's standards, that would be considered mild. He was courageous enough to say, we want our freedom now. And he was saying that if we don't get it, we're going to have to continue to march and call all of you elected officials and powers to be to account. That message today is the opening remarks of almost any movement. Back then, that was considered revolutionary and scary. Now it's the introductory remark. Wouldn't you say so, Dr. Chavis?
Absolutely.
That we want our freedom now and we will take action to see that it happens.
That's right. That's
and
right.
let's be clear that one of the things that he did, along with Dr. King and you, Dr. Chavis and Paul, you did it nonviolently. That was the way to do it. You adhered to the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, who practiced nonviolence. And Dr. King, of course, studying that, going to India to do it and really capture the essence of what it meant for a nonviolent struggle. And it speaks loudly even today. So to the movement that's going on right now, and yes, we do acknowledge the fact that there have been violence. There's been riots. Even over this past weekend, there's been violence. There have been clashes with police or these so-called federal troops that we still don't know the true identity of. We still have a lot of work to be done in this country, do we not?
Oh, yes. Well, nonviolence is still the method that we should use. But also we have to be careful with provocateurs. We have to be careful with provocations. There are people in high authority that want to promote and provoke things that would be self-destructive. And I think that we have to learn from the past, not repeat the past. I think the civil rights history is replete with how we win victories and not to allow certain repressive forces turn us against each other. I'm going to go back to something that Paul said about collectiveness, working together, having operational unity. I mean, a lot of the historians and sociologists, they talk about the differences between SCLC and SNCC and the Black Panthers and et cetera, but hardly very few of these historians know about the unity between all of us. Whether it was age, whether it was theology, whether it was ideology, at a certain point, we knew we had to work together. Malcolm came also to Selma because he knew, even from his perspective, there was going to come a time, and that time is now. We have to work together.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I want to thank you, all three of you, for sharing your recollections and your precious memories of John Lewis, as well as C.T. Vivian. We also lost another giant back in March, and that was Joseph Lowery. Just a few comments about him before we go, if you will.
Well, certainly I had the privilege of working with all three, Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, and John Lewis. And the way that I deal with grief and sorrow is that to rededicate the movement. I'm so proud of the Black press because one of the things we have not talked about, Kelly, is what was the role of the Black press in '63 when Meg Edwards was killed, or the March on Washington? What was the role of the Black press in '64 and '65? What is the role of the Black press today? And I think that the Black press has always been on the front line, not only reporting the news, but advocating for social change, advocating for freedom, justice, and equality. So in the memory of Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, and John Lewis, I'm encouraged because I see so many young people today, in spite of what's going on social media, sometimes the diversions and the myths that are out there. But I believe there's a new generation of freedom fighters rising up. And I think they're going to learn from Fannie Lou Hamer. They're going to learn from Ella Baker. They're going to learn from John Lewis. They're going to learn from Joseph Lowery. They're going to learn from John Lewis.
Indeed. One of the factors during that time was the role of the church as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the Black press grew out of the Black church. I mean,
exactly.
Again, these distinctions, we all have a role to play. And if there's any enduring message that I think during this week of remembrance of John Lewis is that we certainly be inspired, but now we should all be asking ourselves, what good trouble can I make today?
Yeah.
Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, and John Lewis was quite a triumvirate of the kind of leadership and the kind of role models that we in the Black press and those of us who have Black organizations nationally need to emulate and keep the community focused on registering, voting, and making sure we turn out the vote. And we need to just go on and make it happen and just do it. And that will make trouble for everybody. It will make trouble for those in Washington who have ignored the needs of the Black community. And it will cause all of us to realize that if we collectively work together, we can make a change.
Stacey, final word from you.
Well, it's going to be such a week. John Lewis is laying in state today at the Capitol, and later he will go to Atlanta. And I think that the world will be watching, but most importantly, as we had already stated, it's important to watch, but it's also important to act.
I want to have you guys back on, if I can, you gentlemen back on possibly Friday. As you know, Thursday will be the big day for what's happening in terms of saying farewell to John Lewis. But if we can revisit again, that would be great. Paul Cobb, out there on the West Coast, thank you for the great work that you do as the publisher for Oakland Post. Stacey Brown, always good to talk to you as well, chief correspondent for the Black Press USA, and Dr. Benjamin Chavis, president of the National Newspapers Publishers Association and the Black Press USA. All three of you,
Thank you.
Focusing on the needs that we have in our community and beyond. Thank you. Let's keep the dream alive.
Thanks.
God bless. Thank you.
God bless you too. We'll be back with more after this. And welcome back. I want to thank all the guests who appeared on tonight's program, and I certainly want to thank you for this special on John Lewis. He will be forever remembered as a man who championed the cause of peace and courage. In fact, he stated, "Be courageous, create the beloved community, never hate. Remember, we are one people, one love, one humanity." Thank you, John Lewis. Hopefully by you and your example, we all will be ignited and righted and united to not spread hate, but love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me home. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand.